The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the dusty trading post, and Rose Jameson realized with a sinking heart that she had lost everything that mattered to her survival in this harsh land of 1882 Arizona territory. She clutched her empty reticule, her fingers trembling as she searched one more time through the worn fabric lining, hoping against hope that even a single coin had somehow escaped her notice. Nothing. The thieves who had boarded the stage 2 days ago outside of Phoenix had been thorough, taking every cent she owned along with her mother's silver locket, the only thing of value she had left in this world. Rose's fellow passengers had already disembarked, disappearing into the scattered buildings of what the driver had called Tanapa Junction, leaving her alone with her predicament. The driver appeared at the door, his weathered face impatient. "Miss, we are not staying here long. If you are getting off, now is the time." Rose gathered what remained of her dignity along with her single carpetbag and stepped down into the afternoon heat. The sun beat mercilessly on the packed dirt street, and dust devils danced between the wooden structures that made up this frontier town. She had been traveling to Silver City, New Mexico territory, where a teaching position awaited her, but the stage fare to continue would cost $3.50, money she simply did not have. The trading post behind her looked weathered but sturdy, its wooden sign creaking in the hot wind. A saloon stood across the street, its painted windows promising refuge from the sun, but likely little else for a woman traveling alone. Further down, she could see what appeared to be a general store, a blacksmith shop with its forge glowing red even in daylight, and a small building with a cross that she hoped was a church. Rose's stomach churned with anxiety. She had no family, no friends in this territory, and now no means to reach her destination. The teaching position would not wait forever, and if she failed to arrive within the week, they would surely give the job to another applicant. Without that position, she had nothing. Nowhere to go. No prospects. She stood there in the street, her dark traveling dress absorbing the punishing heat, when a man emerged from the trading post carrying supplies. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work, and he wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy. Denim trousers worn soft from use, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face from the brutal sun. A gun belt sat low on his hips, but it was the easy, confident way he carried himself that caught her attention. He loaded his supplies into a wagon hitched nearby, then glanced in her direction. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Rose quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring. She moved toward the trading post's narrow slice of shade, trying to think of what to do next. "Miss Jameson," the stagecoach driver called out to her, "do you have your fare for the next leg? We are departing in 10 minutes. Rose's throat tightened. "I need a moment, please," she managed to say, her voice barely carrying over the distance. The driver shook his head, clearly annoyed, but returned to checking his horse's harnesses. Rose pressed her back against the rough wooden wall of the trading post, feeling the splinters catch at her dress. Think, she told herself. There had to be a solution. Perhaps she could find work here in Tanapa Junction, earn enough for the stage fare, and then continue to Silver City. But how long would that take? And what kind of work could she find in a town this small? "Pardon me, miss." The voice was deep and warm, with a slight drawl that marked him as a man who had spent his life in the West. Rose looked up to find the cowboy from before standing a respectful distance away, his hat now held in his hands. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a striking shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. I do not mean to intrude, but I could not help overhearing your situation with the stage driver. Are you in some kind of trouble? Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. The idea of confessing her destitute state to a complete stranger mortified her, but what choice did she have? Pride would not buy her a ticket to Silver City. I am afraid I find myself in a rather difficult position, she said carefully, trying to maintain what composure she could. I was robbed during my journey, and I no longer have the means to pay my fare to continue to New Mexico territory. The cowboy's expression shifted to one of concern. That is rough luck, miss. These roads can be dangerous for travelers. Did they hurt you? No, thankfully they were only interested in valuables, but I am afraid they were quite thorough. Rose glanced at the stagecoach, where the driver was now climbing back into his seat. I have a teaching position waiting for me in Silver City, but without the fare, I cannot reach it. The cowboy followed her gaze, then looked back at her with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. How much is the fare? $3.50, Rose said quietly. I know it is not a fortune, but I have nothing, not even enough for a meal. To her surprise, the cowboy reached into his pocket without hesitation and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted out coins, then walked directly to the stage driver. Rose watched in disbelief as he handed over the money and exchanged a few words with the man. The driver nodded, pocketed the coins, and glanced at Rose with considerably less impatience than before. The cowboy returned to where she stood, still frozen in shock. Your fare is paid, Miss Jameson. The driver says you have a seat all the way to Silver City. Rose could not find words immediately. This stranger had just handed over a significant sum of money to a stage driver for someone he had never met, someone who could offer him nothing in return. Finally, she managed, Sir, I cannot accept this. I have no way to repay you. I do not even know your name. Marcus Palmer, he said, a slight smile touching his lips. And I am not asking for repayment, miss. Consider it a kindness from one traveler to another. These territories can be hard enough without folks letting each other suffer when a small gesture can help. But $3.50 is not a small gesture, Rose protested. That is nearly a week's wages for some people. I must find a way to repay you. If you give me your direction, I can send the money once I receive my first month's wages from the school. Marcus shook his head, that same gentle smile still in place. There is no need for that. But if you insist on giving me something in return, then give me your smile. That will be payment enough. Rose blinked at him, certain she had misheard. My smile? Yes, miss. You have been standing here looking like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, which I suppose it was in a way. But now your troubles are solved, at least for the moment. So smile, and we will call the debt settled. It was perhaps the strangest transaction Rose had ever been part of, but there was something in Marcus Palmer's earnest expression that told her he was completely serious. Despite herself, despite the strangeness of the situation and the uncertainty that still clouded her future beyond reaching Silver City, Rose felt her lips curve upward. It started small, tentative, but then grew into a genuine smile of relief and gratitude. There, Marcus said softly, and the warmth in his voice seemed to match the Arizona heat. That was worth far more than $3.50, I can promise you that. All aboard for Silver City, the driver called out. Last call. Rose realized she needed to go, but something held her in place for another moment. Mr. Palmer, I truly do not know how to thank you adequately. You have saved me from a terrible situation, and you have asked for nothing in return. That is a rare kind of kindness. Perhaps our paths will cross again someday, Marcus said, settling his hat back on his head. The West is big, but it has a way of bringing people back together. Safe travels, Miss Jameson. Rose wanted to say more, to somehow express the depth of her gratitude, but the driver was growing impatient again. She climbed into the stagecoach, taking her seat and setting her carpetbag beside her. As the stage lurched into motion, she leaned toward the window and looked back. Marcus Palmer stood in the street where she had left him, one hand raised in farewell. Rose lifted her own hand in response, watching until the dust from the wheels obscured her view and Tanapa Junction disappeared behind them. The journey to Silver City took another 2 days, with stops in smaller settlements along the way. Rose shared the coach with a mining engineer heading to inspect claims, a merchant's wife returning from visiting family in Phoenix, and a young man who said little and spent most of the journey dozing. The merchant's wife, a kindly woman named Mrs. Patterson, noticed Rose's lack of meals at the way stations and quietly shared her own provisions, asking no questions about Rose's circumstances. During the long hours of travel, Rose found her thoughts returning again and again to Marcus Palmer. His act of generosity had been so unexpected, so undemanding, that it seemed almost unreal in retrospect. She had encountered many men during her 22 years, and few had shown such selflessness. Most wanted something in return for their kindnesses, whether spoken aloud or merely implied. But Marcus had asked only for her smile, and he had seemed genuinely pleased to receive it. Rose wondered what he did for a living beyond the obvious conclusion that he worked with cattle. He had the look of a ranch hand or perhaps a ranch owner, someone who spent his days under the open sky working with horses and livestock. The way he had handled his money suggested he was not wealthy, but neither was he destitute. $3.50 had been a sacrifice for him, she suspected, but one he had made without hesitation. She wondered, too, if she would ever see him again. The West was indeed vast, as he had said, and the likelihood of their paths crossing a second time seemed remote at best. Silver City was a good 100 miles from Tanapa Junction, and she had no reason to return to Arizona Territory once she was established in her teaching position. The thought saddened her more than seemed reasonable for someone she had known for perhaps 10 minutes. The stagecoach rolled into Silver City on a warm September afternoon. The town was larger than Tanapa Junction, built up in the wake of silver mining that had drawn thousands of prospectors and settlers to the area. The streets were busy with wagons and riders, and the buildings seemed more permanent, many constructed of brick rather than simple wooden frames. Rose gathered her carpetbag and stepped down from the stage, her legs unsteady after so many hours of travel. The stage office sat at the edge of the main street, and Rose approached the clerk inside to ask for directions to the schoolhouse. The man, elderly and half blind by the thickness of his spectacles, squinted at her before pointing east. "Follow Main Street until you reach the church, then turn north. The schoolhouse is a white building with a bell tower. Cannot miss it. Headmistress is Miss Sarah Winters. She will be expecting you, I imagine." Rose thanked him and set off on foot, her carpetbag growing heavier with each step. The afternoon sun slanted between buildings, casting long shadows across the dusty street. She passed a general store, a bank, 2 saloons, a barber shop, and a restaurant that sent the tantalizing aroma of roasted meat into the street. Her stomach growled, reminding her that Mrs. Patterson's generosity had only stretched so far. The church was a modest structure with a white painted cross on its steeple, and Rose turned north as directed. The schoolhouse came into view a block later, exactly as the clerk had described. It was a cheerful building despite its simple construction, with bright white paint and dark green shutters framing the windows. A small house stood adjacent to it, which Rose assumed was the teacher's residence. A woman emerged from the schoolhouse as Rose approached, her arms full of books. She was perhaps 40 years old, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that assessed Rose in an instant. "You must be Miss Rose Jameson," the woman said, her voice carrying the crisp tones of an educated Easterner. "I am Sarah Winters, head mistress of the Silver City School. We had begun to worry that you might not arrive." "I apologize for any concern, Miss Winters," Rose said, setting down her carpetbag to shake the woman's offered hand. "I encountered some difficulties during my journey, but I am here now and eager to begin my duties." Sarah Winters nodded, though her eyes lingered on Rose's worn traveling dress and the single piece of luggage. "Come inside. We have much to discuss regarding your position and accommodations. Classes begin in 3 days, so we have little time to prepare." Rose followed her into the schoolhouse, which consisted of a single large room with benches arranged in rows, a teacher's desk at the front, and a blackboard that had seen many years of use. Shelves along one wall held books and slates, and a large map of the United States hung beside the blackboard, the Western territories marked in different colors. "You will be teaching the primary students," Sarah explained, setting her books on the desk. "Children aged 6 to 10. I handle the older students myself. We have approximately 30 children enrolled, though attendance can be irregular during planting and harvest seasons when families need extra hands. Your wages will be $12 per month, plus room and board in the teacher's cottage." $12 per month was modest, but Rose had expected no more in a frontier town. It would be enough to live on, though not enough to save much. She would need to be careful with every penny, at least until she was more established. "The cottage has a bedroom, a small parlor, and a kitchen area," Sarah continued, leading Rose back outside and toward the adjacent building. "You will share the well with the main schoolhouse. I live in town with my brother and his family, so you will have your privacy. The position includes firewood delivery during winter months and a small allowance for lamp oil and necessities." The cottage was indeed small, but it was clean and well maintained. The bedroom contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a wardrobe. The parlor held a rocking chair, a small table, and a bookshelf. The kitchen area was merely a corner with a cast iron stove, a dry sink, and a cupboard. To Rose, who had been facing the prospect of sleeping in the street just 2 days ago, it looked like a palace. "It is perfect," Rose said sincerely. "Thank you, Miss Winters. You may call me Sarah when we are not in the presence of students or parents," the headmistress said, her stern expression softening slightly. "I believe in maintaining professional boundaries, but we are both educated women in a place that does not always value education. We must support one another. Now, you look exhausted and hungry. Get yourself settled, and I will have my sister-in-law send over a basket of food. Tomorrow we will begin preparing your lessons." Sarah departed, leaving Rose alone in her new home. Rose set her carpetbag on the bed and sank down beside it, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. Less than a week ago, she had been in Phoenix, preparing to begin this journey with hope and nervous excitement. Then had come the robbery, the devastating loss of her money, and the terrible moment in Tonopah Junction when she had thought all her plans would come to nothing. And then, Marcus Palmer had appeared like something out of a story and had given her back her future without asking for anything but her smile. Rose lay back on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought about that smile. It had felt strange at first, forced almost, given the circumstances. But then it had become real, genuine gratitude and relief combining to create something that had felt almost like joy. She wondered what Marcus was doing now. Had he returned to his ranch, wherever that was? Did he think of her at all, or had she been simply one kind act among many in his life? Rose suspected the latter. He had seemed like the sort of man who helped others because it was the right thing to do, not because he expected anything in return, not even gratitude. The basket of food arrived an hour later, brought by a friendly young woman who introduced herself as Martha Collins, Sarah's sister-in-law. The basket contained bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of preserves, along with a small pot of stew that was still warm. Rose ate ravenously, realizing only as she did so how truly hungry she had been. Mrs. Patterson's shared provisions had been generous, but they had not been sufficient for 2 days of travel. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah proved to be an exacting but fair supervisor, walking Rose through the curriculum she would be expected to teach and introducing her to several of the families whose children would be in her class. Rose met miners and merchants, ranchers and tradesmen, all of whom had come to Silver City seeking opportunity in the silver boom. Their children were a mix of eager learners and reluctant students, and Rose felt both excitement and trepidation about the challenge ahead. Classes began on a Monday morning, and Rose discovered that teaching 30 primary students was every bit as demanding as she had imagined. The children ranged from 6-year-olds just learning their letters to 10-year-olds who could read simple books and do basic arithmetic. Keeping them all engaged while addressing their different skill levels required constant attention and creativity. By the end of the first week, Rose collapsed into her rocking chair each evening, exhausted but satisfied. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable routine. Rose rose early each morning to prepare lessons, taught from 8 o'clock until 3 o'clock with a break for lunch, and then spent her evenings grading slates and planning for the next day. Sarah proved to be not only an excellent supervisor but also a friend, and the two women often took their Sunday dinners together at Sarah's brother's house. Yet despite the satisfaction Rose found in her work and the stability of her new life, she could not quite forget Marcus Palmer. His kindness had given her more than just passage to Silver City. It had restored her faith in people at a moment when she had felt most vulnerable and alone. She found herself wondering about him at odd moments, usually when she was walking home from the schoolhouse in the evening or sitting in her rocking chair before bed. October came, bringing cooler temperatures to the high desert. The cottonwood trees along the creek turned golden, and the evenings grew long and dark. Rose purchased a warmer shawl from the general store with part of her first month's wages, and with the rest, she carefully calculated how much she could afford to save. At this rate, it would take her 4 months to save the $3.50 she owed Marcus Palmer, assuming no unexpected expenses arose. She mentioned this calculation to Sarah one Sunday over dinner, explaining the circumstances that had brought her to Silver City. Sarah listened intently, her sharp eyes studying Rose's face. "You feel obligated to repay this man," Sarah said, though it was more observation than question. "I do," Rose confirmed. "He asked for nothing, but that does not mean I owe him nothing. He saved me from a desperate situation. The least I can do is return what he gave." "And yet he specifically told you not to repay him," Sarah pointed out. "Some might argue that ignoring his wishes is itself a form of disrespect." Rose had not considered it from that angle, and the thought troubled her. "I suppose that is true. But it seems wrong to simply accept such generosity without acknowledgement." "You acknowledged it at the time," Sarah said. "And if I know men like the one you describe, That was likely all the acknowledgement he needed or wanted. Cowboys and ranchers in these territories tend to have a strong code of conduct. Helping someone in need is part of that code. Accepting thanks gracefully is also part of it, but expecting repayment would violate the spirit of the original gesture. So you think I should not try to repay him? I think you should do what your conscience dictates, Sarah replied. But I also think you should examine why you feel so strongly about this debt. Is it truly about the money, or is it about something else? Rose had no answer to that question, but it lingered in her mind long after the dinner ended, and she returned to her cottage. Was Sarah right? Was her desire to repay Marcus Palmer about more than just the money? Rose tried to tell herself that it was simple honor and responsibility, but in the quiet darkness of her bedroom, she could not quite convince herself that was the whole truth. The answer to her unspoken questions came in mid-November, when Rose was walking back from the general store with supplies for the schoolhouse. She had just purchased new slate pencils and a tin of chalk, and her mind was occupied with planning the week's lessons when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Miss Jameson, is that truly you?" Rose spun around so quickly she nearly dropped her packages. There, standing in the middle of Main Street with a look of surprised delight on his face, was Marcus Palmer. He wore different clothes than the last time she had seen him, but his bearing was unmistakable, as were those storm cloud eyes. "Mr. Palmer," Rose said, her heart suddenly racing. "I cannot believe it. What are you doing in Silver City?" "I might ask you the same question," Marcus said, stepping closer. He had a saddle thrown over one shoulder and saddlebags in his other hand. "Though I suppose I know the answer, you made it to your teaching position. I am glad." "Thanks to you," Rose said warmly. "Your kindness made all the difference, but you have not answered my question. What brings you to Silver City?" Marcus set down his saddle and saddlebags, rolling his shoulder as if easing a strain. "I have taken a job at the Bar M Ranch about 10 miles north of town. The foreman knew my father back in Texas, and when he heard I was looking for work, he offered me a position. I have been here for 2 weeks now, helping them prepare for winter. I am in town today to get my saddle repaired and pick up supplies." Rose felt an inexplicable surge of happiness at this news. Marcus Palmer was not just passing through Silver City. He was here, living and working nearby. The possibility that had seemed so remote in Tonopah Junction that their paths might cross again had suddenly become reality. "That is wonderful," Rose said, meaning it with an intensity that surprised her. "How are you finding the Bar M?" "It is good work," Marcus replied. "The ranch is well run and the owners are fair. I have a bunk in the ranch house and 3 meals a day. It is more than I had in Arizona Territory." "You were not working at a ranch there?" Rose asked, curious. "I was drifting mostly," Marcus admitted. "Taking jobs where I could find them, moving from place to place. My father died last year, and I suppose I did not quite know what to do with myself after that. We had a small ranch in Texas, but when he passed, I sold it and decided to see more of the West. Tonopah Junction was just another stop along the way." "I am sorry about your father," Rose said softly. The loss of a parent was something she understood all too well. Her own mother had died 3 years ago, and her father had been gone since she was 12. "Thank you. It has been hard, but moving helps. Keeping busy helps." Marcus smiled then, that same gentle expression she remembered from their first meeting. "But finding you here today, that helps too. I have thought about you often, wondered if you made it safely to your destination and if the teaching position was everything you hoped." "You have thought about me," Rose said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Of course," Marcus said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You do not forget someone like you, Miss Jameson," Your courage in the face of trouble, your dignity despite your circumstances, those things stay with a person. Rose felt warmth spread through her chest, and she knew it had nothing to do with the November sun. "I have thought about you as well," she confessed. "Your kindness changed my life, Mr. Palmer. I want to repay you, but I have been told that might insult the spirit of your original gesture. I find myself uncertain what to do." Marcus laughed, a rich, warm sound. "Please do not worry about repaying me. That money bought me something far more valuable than $3.50 could ever be worth. It bought me the memory of your smile and the knowledge that I was able to help someone who truly needed it. That is worth everything to me." They stood there in the street, packages and saddle forgotten, simply looking at each other. Rose felt something shift inside her, a recognition that what she had been feeling these past weeks was not merely gratitude or admiration, but something deeper, something that quickened her pulse and made the world seem brighter. "Would you allow me to buy you lunch?" Rose asked impulsively. "I know a restaurant nearby that serves excellent meals. It would give us a chance to talk properly, and I can tell you about the schoolhouse and my students." Marcus's face lit up. "I would like that very much, Miss Jameson, but please let me buy lunch. I insist." "Then I insist you call me Rose," she replied. "I think we are beyond such formality now, do not you think? Only if you call me Marcus." They walked together to the restaurant, the Golden Star, which occupied a corner building on Main Street. The proprietress, Mrs. Chen, was a Chinese woman whose husband had come to Silver City during the mining rush and stayed to open a restaurant when his claim proved unproductive. She served a combination of traditional Chinese dishes and American fare, and the food was universally acknowledged to be the best in town. Mrs. Chen seated them at a corner table, and they ordered roasted chicken with vegetables. As they waited for their meals, Rose found herself telling Marcus about her students, about Sarah, and the challenges of teaching in a frontier town, about the satisfaction she found in her work despite its difficulties. Marcus listened with genuine interest, asking questions and laughing at her stories about particularly mischievous students. In turn, Marcus told her about life at the bar and ranch, about the hard work of preparing cattle and horses for winter, about learning new skills and making new friends among the ranch hands. He spoke of Texas and his childhood there, of learning to rope and ride from his father, of the sadness that had driven him west after his father's death. "I did not know where I belonged anymore," Marcus said quietly, stirring his coffee. "The ranch where I grew up felt empty without my father. Texas felt empty, so I just kept moving, thinking maybe I would recognize home when I found it." "And have you?" Rose asked. "Found home, I mean." Marcus looked at her across the table, and something in his expression made Rose's breath catch. "I think I might be starting to," he said. They finished their lunch and reluctantly parted ways, Marcus to collect his repaired saddle and Rose to return to the schoolhouse with her supplies. But before they separated, Marcus asked if he might call on her, perhaps take her to church on Sunday and then to dinner afterward. Rose agreed with an eagerness that would have embarrassed her if she had been less happy. Sunday arrived with painful slowness, but when it finally came, Rose found herself taking unusual care with her appearance. She wore her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned her dark hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical bun. When Marcus arrived at her cottage to escort her to church, his expression told her that her efforts had been noticed and appreciated. The service was pleasant, though Rose could hardly focus on the minister's sermon. She was too aware of Marcus sitting beside her, of the warmth of his shoulder occasionally brushing against hers, of the way his voice blended with hers when they sang hymns. After the service, They greeted Sarah and several other acquaintances, and Rose noticed the curious, approving looks that followed them. They dined at the Golden Star again, Mrs. Cheng greeting them like old friends, though it had been less than a week since their previous visit. Over roasted pork and rice, they continued the conversations begun on Sunday, deepening their knowledge of each other with each word exchanged. Rose learned that Marcus loved books despite having little formal education, that he dreamed of eventually owning his own ranch again, that he believed in treating animals with kindness and respect. Marcus learned that Rose had taught herself to read before she started school, that she had once harbored dreams of traveling to Europe, that she believed education could change lives. As the weeks passed and November gave way to December, their Sunday meetings became the highlight of Rose's week. Marcus would ride into town each Saturday evening and spend the night at the boarding house, so he could attend church with Rose on Sunday morning. After services, they would have dinner, then spend the afternoon walking through Silver City, talking and laughing and discovering each other's thoughts and dreams. Rose found herself falling in love with Marcus Palmer, though she tried at first to resist the feeling. Love seemed dangerous, unpredictable, likely to disrupt the stable life she had worked so hard to build. But resisting proved impossible. Marcus was kind and thoughtful, strong and gentle, honest and true. He made her laugh with his stories and think with his questions. He listened to her opinions as if they mattered, treated her as an equal partner in conversation, and never once made her feel less than fully valued. The first snow came in mid-December, dusting Silver City with white and transforming the dusty frontier town into something almost magical. Marcus taught Rose to ice skate on the frozen pond at the edge of town, holding her hands as she wobbled and laughed, catching her when she fell. In turn, Rose introduced Marcus to poetry, reading him verses by Longfellow and Whitman as they sat in her small parlor with the stove glowing warm against the winter cold. It was during one of these evenings, a week before Christmas, that Marcus finally spoke the words that Rose had been longing to hear. "Rose," he said, setting down the book of poems she had been reading from, "I need to tell you something, and I hope you will not think me forward for saying it." Rose's heart began to beat faster. "What is it, Marcus?" "I love you," he said simply. "I think I started falling in love with you that day in Tanapa Junction when you stood in the street looking lost but not defeated, worried but not broken. You had lost everything, but you had not lost yourself. That courage, that strength, it took my breath away, and every moment I have spent with you since has only made me love you more." Rose set down her own book with trembling hands. "Marcus, I love you too. I have been trying to be sensible and practical, but I cannot help it. You are the kindest, finest man I have ever known, and I love you with all my heart." Marcus reached across the small space between their chairs and took her hands in his. "Then will you marry me, Rose? I know I do not have much to offer you right now. I am just a ranch hand with no property of my own. But I am saving money, and in a few years, I will be able to buy land and start my own ranch. I will work hard every day to give you the life you deserve. I promise you that." "You do not need to promise me wealth or property," Rose said, tears of happiness gathering in her eyes. "You already give me everything I need. You give me kindness and respect, laughter and companionship and love. That is all I want, Marcus. That and a life together, whatever that life might look like." "Is that a yes?" Marcus asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Rose said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." Marcus stood and pulled her up with him, gathering her into his arms and kissing her for the first time. It was a tender kiss, full of promise and hope, and when they finally pulled apart, Rose felt as if her heart might burst from happiness. They were married on a cold, clear day in early February of 1883, in the same church where they had attended services together for 3 months. Sarah served as Rose's witness, and the bar and ranch foreman, a gruff but kind-hearted man named Jack Sullivan, stood up for Marcus. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Rose felt a sense of rightness and belonging she had not known since her mother's death. The owner of the bar and ranch, a prosperous cattleman named Thomas Morrison, gave Marcus and Rose the use of a small cabin on the ranch property as a wedding gift. It was larger than Rose's teacher's cottage and situated in a beautiful valley with views of the surrounding mountains. Rose continued teaching, making the 10-mile journey to and from Silver City in the wagon Marcus had saved up to buy, while Marcus continued his work with the ranch's cattle and horses. Their first year of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The winter was harsh, with heavy snows that sometimes made Rose's journey to school impossible. But Marcus always made sure she was safe and comfortable, chopping extra wood for the stove and surprising her with small gifts he crafted himself. A wooden box to hold her teaching supplies, a bookshelf for the cabin, a rocking chair for the porch. Spring came late but glorious, and Rose discovered she was expecting a child. The news filled both of them with joy and a little fear. Childbirth was dangerous in the best of circumstances, and the nearest doctor was in Silver City, 10 miles away over roads that could be difficult depending on weather. But Rose was young and healthy, and Marcus's love and support gave her courage. She continued teaching through the summer, though Sarah insisted on finding a temporary replacement for the fall term. Their son was born in early September, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. They named him William James Palmer, called him Will from the start, and Rose marveled at the perfection of his tiny fingers and the strength of his surprisingly loud cry. Marcus proved to be a devoted father, taking over many of the household chores so Rose could rest and focus on nursing Will. He would sit in the rocking chair for hours, holding his son and singing old cowboy songs in his deep, gentle voice. Rose would watch them together and feel overwhelmed with love for these two people who had become her entire world. As Will grew from infant to toddler, Marcus's dream of owning his own ranch began to seem more possible. He had been saving diligently since starting work at the bar, and Thomas Morrison, impressed with Marcus's work ethic and skill with horses, had given him several raises and bonuses. Rose contributed her teaching wages as well, and together they accumulated a sum that might be enough for a down payment on land. In the spring of 1885, opportunity arrived in the form of a neighboring rancher who wanted to sell his property and move to California. The ranch was modest, just 80 acres with a small house, a barn and water rights to a good stream, but it was enough to start with. Marcus and Rose walked the property together, Will riding on Marcus's shoulders, and Rose could see the hope and longing in her husband's eyes. "What do you think?" Marcus asked. "The house needs work, and the fences need mending, and it will take years of hard labor to build this into something really profitable. But it could be ours, Rose, our own place." Rose looked at the house, weathered but structurally sound, then at the land stretching away in gentle rolls of grass and wildflowers. She thought about the cabin they lived in now, comfortable but not truly theirs, and about Will growing up with his own land to explore and eventually inherit. "I think it is perfect," she said. "I think we should buy it." The negotiations took several weeks, but by June the ranch was theirs. They named it the Palm View Ranch after Marcus's surname and the beautiful views of the valley it commanded. Thomas Morrison, who had become a friend and mentor to Marcus, helped them purchase their first small herd of cattle and even lent them some horses to get started. Marcus worked harder than Rose had ever seen anyone work, up before dawn and often not stopping until long after dark, mending fences and outbuildings, breaking horses, caring for cattle. Rose returned to teaching part-time, working just 3 days a week so she could spend the rest of her time helping Marcus with the ranch and caring for Will. She learned to ride well enough to help with moving cattle, to mend tack and handle ranch accounts, to do dozens of tasks she had never imagined doing when she was a young woman traveling to her first teaching position. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The ranch slowly became profitable, and Marcus's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled horseman spread through the territory. They added to their herd gradually, reinvesting everything they could back into the ranch. In 1887, Rose gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace Elizabeth. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they called Samuel Marcus. By 1890, 8 years after that chance meeting in Tonopah Junction, the Palmview Ranch was one of the most respected small ranches in the area. Marcus had expanded their holdings to over 200 acres, and their cattle brought good prices at market. Rose had given up teaching to focus on raising their children and helping manage the ranch, though she still tutored children from neighboring ranches when their parents requested it. One evening in late summer, Marcus and Rose sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. The house had been expanded and improved over the years, and the porch now stretched the full width of the building, with comfortable chairs and a swing where Rose liked to sit with the children. Will, now 7 years old, was in the barn with his father's foreman, learning to care for the horses. Grace and Samuel played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm evening air. "You remember the day we met?" Rose asked, taking Marcus's hand. "That hot afternoon in Tonopah Junction when I thought my life was over." "I remember thinking I had never seen anyone so brave," Marcus said, squeezing her fingers. "Standing there trying to figure out what to do next, not giving in to despair despite having every reason to." "I thought you were crazy," Rose admitted with a laugh. "Giving me that money and asking only for a smile. Who does that?" "Someone who recognized something special when he saw it," Marcus replied. "Best $3.50 I ever spent. You got much more than a smile, though," Rose pointed out. "You got a wife, 3 children, and a partner who can rope a steer almost as well as you can." Marcus laughed, pulling her close. That I did. Rose leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their children play and thinking about the journey that had brought them here. She thought about the thieves who had robbed her, how terrified and alone she had felt, how close she had come to losing everything. And then she thought about Marcus stepping out of that trading post, seeing her distress, and choosing to help without hesitation or expectation of reward. "What would have happened if you had not been in Tonopah Junction that day?" Rose wondered aloud. "What would I have done?" "You would have found a way," Marcus said confidently. "You are the strongest person I know, Rose. You would have figured something out." "Maybe," Rose said. "But I am glad I did not have to. I am glad you were there. I am glad you asked me for my smile." "So am I," Marcus said softly. "So am I." The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and challenges. Will grew into a fine young man who loved ranching as much as his father did, eventually taking on more and more responsibility for the day-to-day operations. Grace proved to have a gift for working with horses, developing a reputation for being able to gentle even the most difficult animals. Samuel, the youngest, showed his mother's love of learning and eventually became a teacher himself, though he always helped with the ranch during summers and school breaks. Marcus and Rose aged together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced droughts and harsh winters, cattle diseases and market downturns, all the challenges that came with ranching in the West. But they faced them together, as partners in every sense of the word, and their love never wavered. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, including Sarah Winters, now retired from teaching but still sharp and engaged with the world. Thomas Morrison, who had become like a father to Marcus after his own father's death, traveled from his ranch with his wife and grandchildren. As Rose looked around at the gathering, at the ranch that had grown from 80 acres to over 500, at the children and grandchildren playing in the yard where her own children had once played, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. All of this had come from a single act of kindness, from one person choosing to help another in a moment of need. She found Marcus standing near the barn, talking with Will about plans to expand their breeding program. Rose walked over and slipped her hand into her husband's, and he smiled down at her with the same warmth she remembered from their first meeting 26 years ago. "Happy anniversary," Marcus said, kissing her forehead. "Happy anniversary," Rose replied. "Thank you for everything, Marcus. For saving me that day in Tonopah Junction, for loving me, for building this life with me." "You saved me too, you know," Marcus said quietly. "I was drifting when we met, lost and looking for something I could not name. You gave me purpose and direction. You gave me a reason to build something lasting. You gave me everything." They stood together watching their family and friends celebrate, and Rose thought about all the paths their lives might have taken if circumstances had been just slightly different. If she had not been robbed, she would have passed through Tonopah Junction without incident and never met Marcus Palmer. If Marcus had not happened to be at that trading post at that exact moment, their paths might never have crossed. If he had not been the kind of man who helped strangers without expectation of reward, she might have remained just another person in trouble whom he passed by. But all those things had happened, in exactly the way they needed to happen, and the result was this: a life filled with love and purpose, challenges overcome and dreams realized, a family built on a foundation of kindness and mutual respect. As the sun set that evening on their anniversary celebration, painting the Arizona sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus and Rose renewed the vows they had made 25 years earlier. Their children stood witness, along with grandchildren who played at their feet and friends who had shared their journey. And when Marcus kissed his wife at the end of the ceremony, Rose smiled the same smile she had given him that day in Tonopah Junction, the smile that had started everything. The Palmview Ranch continued to thrive under the management of Marcus and Rose, and eventually their son Will. As Marcus and Rose moved into their 60s and 70s, they gradually turned over more responsibility to the next generation, though they never fully retired. Marcus could be found every morning checking on the horses, and Rose maintained a large garden that supplied vegetables not just for their family, but for several neighbors as well. They lived to see automobiles replace horses on many roads, to see New Mexico achieve statehood in 1912, to survive the Great War and the influenza pandemic that followed it. Through all of it, they remained devoted to each other, still holding hands when they walked, still sitting together on the porch each evening to watch the sunset. In 1920, Marcus and Rose celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary surrounded by 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. The Palmview Ranch had become one of the most successful in the region, known for its quality cattle and horses, but more importantly for the fair and honest dealings of its owners. Marcus Palmer passed away peacefully in 1922 at the age of 65, with Rose holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed. He died as he had lived, with quiet dignity and surrounded by the love of the family he had worked so hard to provide for. Rose grieved deeply, but took comfort in the legacy they had built together and the love that had sustained them through nearly 4 decades of marriage. Rose lived another 8 years, remaining active in the ranch's operations and doting on her growing collection of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She often told them the story of how she and their grandfather had met, of the kindness that had changed both their lives, of the power of helping others without expectation of reward. When Rose Jameson Palmer passed away in 1930 at the age of 70, she was laid to rest beside Marcus in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the Palmview Ranch. Their headstone bore a simple inscription, "Together in life and in death, united by love and kindness." But their true legacy lived on in the family they had created, in the ranch that still bore their name, and in the story, passed down through generations, of how a stranded woman with no money and a cowboy with a generous heart had found each other in a dusty Arizona town and built a love that would last forever. The tale of Marcus Palmer paying Rose Jameson's stage fare and asking for nothing but her smile became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of how small acts of kindness could change lives in ways no one could predict. The Palmview Ranch continued to operate well into the 20th century, always under the ownership of Palmer descendants who remembered and honored the values their ancestors had established: hard work, fair dealing, and above all, kindness to those in need. And if travelers passing through New Mexico in later years sometimes heard the story of the cowboy and the stranded woman, of the $3.50 that bought a lifetime of love, they could be forgiven for thinking it sounded like something out of a fairy tale. But it was not a fairy tale. It was simply the story of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment, and who chose to build a life together based on the simple but powerful foundation of genuine love and mutual respect. Their story lived on as a testament to the truth that kindness given freely, without expectation of return, often brings rewards greater than anything that could be requested or imagined, and that sometimes the most valuable things in life cannot be purchased with money, but only with an open heart and a generous spirit. Marcus and Rose had proven that love could flourish even in the harsh conditions of the frontier West, that two people from different circumstances could create something lasting and beautiful together, and that the greatest adventures often began with the smallest acts of human decency. Their love story became part of the fabric of the land they had worked and the community they had helped build, a reminder that even in difficult times, there was always room for kindness, always reason for hope, and always the possibility that one moment of compassion could change everything.